Morning, America. This is Joe McHugh. It is October 9th, 2019, and we have another version or interpretation of today's news for you. Yesterday, the White House said that they will not cooperate with the impeachment inquiry, calling it a kangaroo court. The kangaroo court that he's referring to is the Senate, is a constitutionally mandated and approved process for inquiring in terms of, or rather for determining the guilt or innocence of a sitting president. Specifically, the Republican-controlled Senate would try the president to determine whether or not, again, he was guilty or innocent. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who happens to also have been appointed by a Republican, would preside over the trial of impeachment if it got to that point. So now the president has just one responsibility, and it's not only the president, but also any Republican, any senator, representative, or military officer, or any other officer of the United States takes the same oath of office. And it's, quote, "I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully office," and this is the oath of office for the president, "that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." This is in Article 2, Section 1, the last paragraph. "That I will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." That's the president's primary responsibility. Pretty much his only responsibility is to protect the Constitution and lead the nation. So, still under Article 2, Section 4, "The President and other civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors." So, understanding that, was there a high crime? Maybe, maybe not. Was there a misdemeanor? I would argue that the making a mockery of the Constitution is absolutely, at the very least, a misdemeanor. And a misdemeanor is defined as a criminal offense less serious than a felony, a minor crime punishable by a fine or short jail time, like jaywalking across a street. Certainly, when you have an oath of office to support and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and you make a mockery of the Constitution, that is a violation of your oath, and a violation of your oath is more than enough grounds for impeachment. So that's the reason why we don't really need to cover too much more on this. There will be much more news coming over the coming months, but certainly all you need to know is that the president has disavowed his oath of office and therefore has committed an impeachable offense in that regard, and that is enough to remove him from the office of president. Moving on to other matters that appear to be more consequential, right? So we have decided to remove our troops from Syria. Just a few days after that, Turkey is now on the offensive in Syria. And it makes you wonder, why Syria? What is so important about Syria? Well, let's go ahead and dig into what is important about Syria. What do we know? Well, the CIA World Factbook tells us that Syria exports, their primary export is, guess, let's see if you can guess it. Here it is. Crude oil, petroleum products, minerals. Okay, so yet again, it's another country that is basically suffering as a result of the fact that they happen to have natural resources. And as a matter of fact, they have a lot of natural gas as well. And right before the invasion, they had been liberalizing their economic policies, cutting lending rates, opening private banks, consolidating multiple exchange rates, raising prices, and establishing a stock market. Okay, so this is not, your run-of-the-mill caveman operation here. This was a society, a very liberal Western-like society, no doubt run by a President Assad who was educated at Oxford. Educated at Oxford, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so again, this is It's not what you think is going on over in Syria. So the question is, well, what is going on in Syria, and why were we there? Why did we go there? I thought it was about terrorism. Generally, when you think it's about terrorism, it's about natural gas and oil. Here we have a map. Here, Syria, there's Iraq, there's Iran. Now, Iraq, Iran, and Syria all have a vast quantity of oil and natural gas. Turkey is is a NATO ally and borders the European Union. Syria is the last piece of ground between Iraq and Turkey that would allow the free flow of natural gas directly into Western Europe. So, and again, Ukraine is also an issue, right? So why is Ukraine important? 80% of Russia's natural gas flows through Ukraine. This is all about natural gas. And so why is natural gas, why does the United States care so much about natural gas? Well, the reason why the United States cares so much about natural gas, I wrote an article back in June of 2017 about Qatar, about whether they were an ally or an extremist. And the top 6 producers of natural gas in June of 2017 were Russia, the United States, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. What happened was that we recently, as of, let's see, it was in June of 2017. Prior to that, it was all the way since 1973, we were not exporting oil. And this is also, by the way, part of the policy that was outlined in the Project for a New American Century, which called for a new Pearl Harbor that I and other people believe is the smoking gun that shows that 9/11 was an inside job, besides the fact that the buildings clearly collapse upon themselves and they look exactly like a controlled demolition. Nevertheless, that document calls for the export of natural gas after we have exhausted the rest of the world's general supply of oil and gas. And the fact that there was an attack on Saudi oil fields suggests that they are starting to run a little bit lower on their resources. The fact that Aramco, Saudi Arabia's oil company, has taken over a year to list their IPO suggests that they have had issues potentially identifying and validating their oil stock as well. So Syria, again, it's about natural gas. If you can create a pipeline from Iran through Syria and through Turkey or Ukraine into Western Europe, you cannot sell liquid natural gas from the United States to Western Europe. That is the issue, because pipeline gas is far less expensive than liquid natural gas that has to be shipped over water, and that's how we would end up selling and monetizing our gas assets. Okay, so moving on. I had a request yesterday about what I felt about the idea of a public bank. Now, Los Angeles looks like it may be the first city in the country to open its own public bank. Now, the question was, how do I feel about a public bank? And the answer to that is it's twofold. First, I think we should explore the role of the government. And the role of the government is not to compete with the private sector. The role of the government is to facilitate and step in to where the market mechanism tends to fail. So you can make an argument, and I believe that's what they're making in this case, that from a housing standpoint, that there's a need for a public bank, and that they may be right about that. But and I contend that all of this could be solved with replacing the Federal Reserve with a central credit union instead. The government typically uses there's government operations, government-sponsored subsidies, and tariffs are typically used when new industries are too young to stand on their own, or they would be under threat from other countries. And so then you want to protect them with tariffs or subsidize them to help them grow. Once they've established maturity, that's when you want to reduce or eliminate those tariffs and those subsidies. Now, the idea for this public bank is specifically, it seems to be addressing um, public housing, and there is a severe issue, a big issue in California, especially San Francisco, with regard to their public housing problem. And so, if this is one of the ways that they need to address it, then so be it. I contend that a credit union, um, if we had replaced, for example, if we replace our Federal Reserve, which is a private bank, and it's owned by the bank shareholders, and the money that they earn from our production as people, through interest as well as through inflation, that value transfers to the banks, the Federal Reserve, and then the bank in turn pays out a dividend to the bank shareholders. If we were to replace that mechanism with a central credit union instead, then that credit union would have members of the citizens. The citizens would be the member shareholders of that credit union, and so we would receive the dividend instead. Now, that would also mean that the people would have a voice with regard to the policies of companies in our country, because the central credit union would end up owning, as the central bank does now, a large amount of the shares in these corporations. And so we would be it would be much easier to influence the policies to reinforce that we don't want pollution, that we want better income equality. And really, the income equality issue can be addressed by doing a better job on inflation. In other words, trying to eliminate inflation by maintaining a cap on the size and the amount of currency available, as well as that public dividend paid to the individual. So those are now where a credit union would might not fill that gap, and this article talks about that as well. That's where you compare. That's where you compare a nonprofit with that. Now, is there a role potentially, for a public bank? Potentially, but I generally am a little bit cautious about giving the government too much responsibility, because simply without proper transparency, and that would be the caveat. There has to be full transparency as well as accountability in order for this to function properly. Otherwise, you're just opening up a can of worms for potential corruption. Now, again, and I talk about a clean, green America. I think that we can do a lot better than what we have been doing. If we replaced our central bank with a central credit union and took that $4 trillion balance sheet and invested it into renewables, we would have a clean, green America that was healthy, wealthy, and free. The dividend, the $1 trillion a year that we're paying to the banks, instead would be paid out to the citizens of the American Republic. Each of us would receive about $4,000 a year, which I contend ought to be invested into these renewables and saved through retirement. And in doing so, we would each have an annuity fully funded, that would be an upgrade upon Social Security, because Social Security is a bona fide Ponzi scheme based on the taxes that are drawn in on an annual basis. There is no trust fund. It's not functioning the way it ought to be. And so this would be a way to make sure that it does function properly by taking our dividend, investing it on behalf of the people, allocating it to the individuals, but keeping it in reserves to pay out upon retirement, or upon when you're ready to go to college. Again, $4,000 a year invested over 18 years at 7% gets you $155,000 just in time to go to college. And if you invest that money again for another 22 years, at age 40, you would have $1 million. Or if you were to use that money and go to college and then start over with that $4,000 and work for the next 40 years from age 20 to 60, 22, 21 to 61, you would have $1 million. And so that $1 million with the proper interest rates would end up as a $40,000 to $60,000 annual income. And so this is a way to address so much of what is going on. We could cut taxes probably by 60% by doing this, because you would be taking out the interest owed to the central bank. You'd be effectively replacing Social Security with a more solvent plan that doesn't require taxation. And then we would have fewer health problems because the planet, we would be healthy, wealthy, and green. We wouldn't be polluting. We would be on renewables. The plastic pollution would be reduced because plastic is a byproduct of oil. Really, this is, believe it or not, this really is a silver bullet. And so to find this page, simply go to fundly.com/liberty-strikes-back-vote-joe-2020, or you can do a search for Liberty Strikes Back and Fundly. So again, that's another version of today's news, and appreciate you listening in. We'll be back with more on this again tomorrow. Have a good day.